Hi, I'm Kaitlin Anderson, a doctoral candidate in the College of Education and Health Professions at the University of Arkansas, and I'm here with Gary Ritter, a professor of education policy in the college. We're here to discuss our research on disparities in school disciplinary outcomes in Arkansas schools. In our study published in Education Policy Analysis Archives in May of 2017, we addressed three key questions. First, across the state of Arkansas, what disproportionalities exist in the use of exclusionary discipline for students of color, low-income students, special education students, or English language learners? Second, given that we do find that Black students receive stricter consequences statewide, we examine whether these disproportionalities exist within schools. That is, do administrators in schools levy differential punishments for the same infractions for different subgroups of students? And finally, given that we find most of the disparities occur across schools rather than within, what are the school characteristics that are associated with harsher or longer disciplinary consequences? Before we discuss our study in particular, we'll talk for a minute about school discipline in the U.S. Recently, national data from sources such as the Office for Civil Rights, or OCR, have clearly illustrated national disparities in the use of out-of-school suspensions and expulsions. For example, Black students in particular are faced with out-of-school suspensions at a rate that is more than twice as high as for Hispanic students and more than 3 times as high as for white students. However, one weakness of such national overviews is that they do not rely on student or infraction level data, so it's unclear the extent to which these disparities in punishments are due to disparities in referrals or misbehavior, or perhaps to bias on behalf of the adults levying the punishments. Thus, it's good news that recent studies like ours have made use of student-level data to ask whether Black students receive disproportionately strict punishments even after accounting for the specific types of infractions cited in the disciplinary referrals. So next, Gary will describe our data, methods, and some of our key findings.
So I'll start with a little bit about our data set. We use 7 years of infraction-level data for all of the approximately 450,000 students in Arkansas schools in any given year. We display our data as instances of either infraction or consequence per 100 students. First, with regard to infractions, the bar graph, which hopefully is not too small to see, shows that the vast majority of cited infractions fall into the category of minor nonviolent, as is evident on the far right of the graphic. Moreover, the graphic shows that Black students are disproportionately represented in this category, with more than 64 instances per 100 Black students each year, relative to 25 and 20 for the other racial groups. Second, with regard to consequences, we see that the most frequent consequences are suspensions, either in school or out of school. And again, we see that Black students are overrepresented in each punishment category. These raw data clearly do suggest disparities, but the main benefit of our data set over most used in previous studies is that we can assess whether Black students are more likely to receive exclusionary discipline relative to their white peers written up for the same types of infractions. To address this question, we estimate a logistic regression model in which our outcome variable is a dichotomous measure indicating whether or not a given infraction resulted in exclusionary discipline. Importantly, our model includes a vector of student demographic controls. Theoretically then, the likelihood of an infraction resulting in exclusionary discipline should be predicted by the infraction itself and perhaps the infraction history of the student cited. It should not, however, be influenced by the student's racial background or other demographic characteristics. Thus, to test whether Black students or other types of students are disproportionately punished, we simply check whether the coefficients on these demographic variables are significant. So what did we find? The bar graph shows the odds ratios for various demographic markers in our logistic regression. The coefficients come from a model that includes all of the demographic characteristics in the same model, but does not include school fixed effects for this first question. What we find is that across the state, Black students are 2.4 times as likely as white students committing the same infraction type and with similar behavior histories to receive exclusionary discipline. This stark disparity in Arkansas occurs across schools. Next, we show the results of the same model, but with school fixed effects added so that we can then consider the within-school disparities. And here we see that the increased risk of exclusionary discipline for Black students nearly completely goes away, as the odds ratio for Black students is now approximately 1. Kaitlin's going to close with our key takeaways.
So first of all, simple comparisons of disparities in the use of exclusionary discipline without taking into account the actual reported behavioral history does not paint a clear picture. But in fact, even after taking reported behavior into account, Black students across the state of Arkansas are still about 2.4 times as likely to receive exclusionary discipline. Yet these differences, at least for Black students, are entirely across schools rather than within schools, indicating that the key issue may relate to the types of schools that Black students are likely to attend and not discriminatory behavior on the part of adults within any particular school. We also find that, as expected, the types of schools that tend to give harsher or longer exclusionary consequences are also the schools with high concentrations of Black students, and that the racial composition of schools is a more significant driver of the use of exclusionary discipline than even socioeconomic status is. While we discuss the policy implications in more detail in the paper, our broad suggestions are that, first of all, information is key, and that without these more careful analyses, such as this one, we may misinterpret what's happening in our schools. And then secondly, that any top-down approaches, for example, state-level policies that seek to address these disparities, need to understand that the high rates of exclusionary discipline are targeted in particular types of schools, and as a result, reform efforts must be targeted as well. We thank you for your time, and we hope you read our paper.